Let's get to the scenario breakdowns, which is where we're at now. And these are good too. These scenarios will help highlight what we're discussing right now. So let's watch the first video. So we both have blades out. We're on the street. This is in Colombia. We've got multiple people all over the place. So you never know who else is going to be involved in this. They're both in reverse grip. So there's a little bit of that language there that kind of tells me that they either mirrored each other or there's a level of experience here, but they're both kind of dancing around, jumping around. Again, they're mirroring each other's behavior, and that happens in the street often. As soon as you see somebody put their hands up, what do? You put your hands up. So this is really foolish in my opinion, and I talk about this in my blade work. We just talked about a scenario where is a blade over a firearm a good choice, or where is a firearm over a blade a good choice? This is where a firearm comes into play. If I have a threat that's holding a blade in front of me, my firearm is going to come out now because I don't want to do blade on blade. I don't want to sit here and do this dance, right? Because now we're talking about methodologies and we're talking about getting in close and having to close the distance with the blade. If I'm truly in danger and there's a threat to my life or my family, I'm going to pull that gun out and try to neutralize the threat immediately. Maybe I don't even have to pull the trigger. Maybe I can just put him in his place and say, hey man, put the blade down or get out of here. So this is a good example of firearm over blade. The other thing is, from a tactics perspective, I'm never going to have reverse grip against another blade. There's no absolutes, I shouldn't say never, but more than likely I'm not going to be in reverse grip because what happens? They both have their dominant side back and they're in reverse grip. You lose a lot of distance that way as opposed to having the blade in a forward position where I gain more distance with blade on blade. Again, I don't want to get into a blade on blade position to begin with, but just something to consider when you're staring at this video and you're watching the rest of this unfold. All right, hit play. So these guys continue to do the dance and somebody lands a strike. Now, you're going to tell really quickly here that he hits him right in the face, and I think it was an ocular shot. Now, if you guys know anything about my training as well, an ocular shot stops fights. I don't care how big you are. I don't care how tough you are. This guy's adrenaline's pumping. He gets hit in the eye, boom, right there. He turns around because his adrenaline's pumping. He thinks about engaging, and he's just done. He knows it. He knows he's done. He's grabbing his eye, and I don't know the follow-up to this video, but that's game over. And then they break contact, and they're doing all this dancing around, and he gets smacked in the face, and then was it worth it? Whatever they were toiling over or whatever they were fighting over, was it worth it? You've got two pretty long objects that these guys are holding in reverse grip, mirroring each other back and forth on the street, and now this guy probably just lost his eyesight in his left eye, and over what is really the question here. But it's a learning point, both from the standpoint of how do we escalate and de-escalate. And I'm going to tell you one last thing about this. If I see a guy with a blade in reverse grip, and he's coming after me in the street, I'm honestly not even gonna pull my blade out. My blade is gonna stay right where it's at. You know why? Because I still want to be able to manipulate him with both of my hands and block. So that shot that came over his head and hit him in the eye would have been able to be defended if I had both hands to be able to crash in and be able to block that hand and then control his limb and his body and then be able to crush the guy. Clear, control, crush. It's more of an asset to me to have the ability to grip and manipulate and block than it is to have the blade out. Again, the blade, unless, as you see in this video, strikes in the ocular, a lot of the times it's not going to be an immediate effect like we think it's going to in the street. I know guys personally that have been stabbed in the heart in the middle of a fight and didn't even know they got stabbed. Right in the middle of the aorta, they were bleeding out. Somebody came up and wiped the thick, dark blood off their chest and like, hey man, are you okay? And then he passed out. Luckily, they rushed him to the hospital, were able to save his life. But I think he died for a moment, minutes at that point. But they were able to do open heart surgery and rip his chest open. But he had no idea that he even got hit because the adrenaline was pumping so much. So it just goes to show you how fast these things can happen. And if I'm in a real fight like this, I want the ability to manipulate that hand and that limb as much as possible. All right, a lot of good learning points with these blade videos. Let's get to the next video. So you've got two guys standing off here in the street, one shorter guy, one guy's already got his hands up, right? So much to learn from this. Now, this guy's fumbling around with his pocket, he switches hands. Now you're just gonna see the guys go back and forth. I'm not sure if this guy actually got stabbed or if any of those strikes penetrated his abdomen there. But they're in this, dynamic environment. You're on the street, you're stepping over fences, you're in the bushes, you got trees behind you. I mean, I love it for training purposes. But then he just trips right over the next part of the fence and he falls right on his butt, right? Plan for that. That's what I tell people all the time. Plan for those scenarios. Now, his back's all wet right here, and I actually thought initially, I was like, maybe he got hit in the aorta and he was just gushing blood. But I think the street's wet, and that's why his shirt got all soaked right here, because he's rolling around in it and then falls down again in the back where I really can't see. Yeah, you can see he's already soaking wet right there. The key things to think about here, when his hands were up, already moving around, that guy should have already had that fence and that obstacle up between them already. That way he didn't just get shot in the face, because that strike could have been what led to him getting knocked out. Put that obstacle in between you. Get your hands up immediately. If that guy's already looking aggressive, put your hands up. The second learning point here, if you go back more towards when he starts drawing the blade, you can see that he hasn't had many reps here, because he reaches down with his left hand, but then switches hands and puts the blade in his right hand. So there's a lot of fumbling around. And if you're really going to trust your blade or what you're carrying on a daily basis to save your life, get the reps in, know where it's at, get the reference points. I shouldn't have to think about this to be able to grab onto my blade and get this thing out and deployed to be able to affect this. Last point that I'll say about this specific scuffle, was it necessary to pull his blade or his folder or whatever it was he had out of his pocket in this scenario? I am gonna go ahead and say no, it wasn't, because he threw a fist. They're talking back and forth in the street. He's got his hands up. This could have been mitigated by just putting my hands up initially and then figured out what was going on. It's one-on-one. It doesn't look like that guy's gonna overpower him necessarily. And it just looks like a back and forth. Again, I don't have the exact context, but I can say with a lot of confidence that the blade really didn't need to come out to be able to mitigate this completely and then shift gears. Now, if the guy started to get overwhelmed and really was at a disadvantage and he was being attacked overtly, could he have justification to be able to pull that out and save his life? Yes, but I'm not seeing that here, and that just opens up a whole, bunch of things where it's like, do you really want to be stabbing this guy, in a street that could have been mitigated with your hands and possibly having that guy lose his life? Again, I don't have the context. There could have been a lot of pre-fight that we don't have here, but they are great learning points. Know where your blades are. If you're going to deploy them effectively. Get your hands up in the middle of a fight like this. Don't be sitting there with your hands down. And even if you're carrying something that you think you're going to deploy, that can happen to people too, where they're like, oh, this is getting really bad. I want to get my blade out. Well, the quickest way for me to get my blade out is to have my hands down near my waistband. Well, that doesn't matter. That's great. That's why we talk about that shield draw in our blade work episodes, is that you want to have that shield up. The biggest threat is his fist, which if he had any better of a shot, that might have been lights out. Then he's getting soccer kicked in the head. Then he's going to the hospital and he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And that's what we want to avoid.